The call came at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Four men in masks walked through the front doors of Meridian Trust on West 54th Street like they owned the place. Because for the next 2 hours, they did. Screaming, gunfire cracking against marble. 63 people hitting the floor, but the men with the guns weren't there for money. They were there for one woman. And the one man standing between her and a body bag? He looked like nobody. Worn boots, calloused hands, a tired face that belonged to a guy who just wanted to cash his paycheck and get home to his kid. They had no idea what they'd just walked into. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories that will keep you up at night. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and leave a comment with your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in. This one doesn't slow down. The line at Meridian Trust had been moving slowly all afternoon, the way lines at banks always do on Tuesdays, as if the universe specifically conspires to make Tuesday the most inconvenient day of the week. Nathan Cross had been standing in it for 22 minutes. He knew because he'd checked his watch 4 times, and each time Emma had tugged at his sleeve and asked if they could go get a hot dog from the cart on the corner when they were done. After, he'd told her the first 3 times. The 4th time he'd added, "Yeah, okay," with extra mustard. She was 7. She had her mother's eyes on that specific shade of green that looked almost gold in certain light. And she was currently engaged in a very serious investigation of the lobby's marble floor, dragging the toe of her sneaker along the grout lines between tiles to see if she could follow them in one continuous path without lifting her foot. She'd been doing it for 10 minutes. She hadn't bumped into anyone yet, which Nathan considered a minor miracle. The lobby of Meridian Trust was the kind of space that made you feel like you should lower your voice. 40-foot ceilings, columns that looked like they belonged in a courthouse, dark wood paneling along the walls, brass fixtures, the kind of carpet in the executive section that was too thick to be practical. The whole place smelled like climate control and old money. Nathan didn't belong here, and he knew it. His work boots left faint scuff marks on the polished floor. His jacket had a fraying cuff on the left sleeve he kept meaning to fix. He had a deposit slip folded in his shirt pocket, 2 weeks of pay from the Carlisle renovation project up on 61st, and a form he needed stamped confirming the deposit had cleared, because his landlord, Mr. Dietrich, was the kind of man who didn't trust verbal confirmation of anything. He shifted his weight, looked at the clock on the wall. 4:48. "Dad." "I see the line, Em." "I wasn't going to say that." "What were you going to say?" She looked up at him, still dragging her toe along the grout. "Do you think the fish in that tank up front are bored?" Nathan glanced at the large decorative tank near the entrance. 3 fat koi drifting in slow circles. "Probably." "We should come back and visit them." "We should not do that." "Why?" "Because this is a bank, not an aquarium." She considered this with the absolute seriousness that 7-year-olds applied to everything. They're basically the same thing. He was trying to think of a response to that when the doors opened. He heard it before he saw it, a sound that was wrong in the specific way that sounds are wrong when they don't belong in the space they're in. Not the automatic swish of the front entrance. Something harder. Something metallic connecting with something else metallic. Then a voice, too loud, calibrated to carry across every square foot of the lobby. "Everybody down now! Down on the ground! Hands where I can see them!" Nathan had his arm around Emma and was moving sideways in the same half-second that the shouting started. Not away, not toward the exit, sideways, toward the cluster of marble columns that ran along the left side of the lobby. His brain was doing 2 things simultaneously. The thing it had been trained to do for 9 years, which was assess, and the thing it had been doing for the past 3 years as a full-time job, which was keep his daughter breathing. 4 of them. 2 at the main entrance, 1 moving toward the teller stations, 1 already sweeping left to cover the executive area. Dark tactical gear, balaclavas, military-style boots. Not Halloween costumes, not amateurs who'd watched too many movies. The way the one at the entrance was moving, controlling the room's geometry, told Nathan they'd walked this space before. The weapons were rifles, modified, suppressed, which meant this wasn't a smash and grab. Emma made a sound against his shoulder. "Shh." He pressed his lips to the top of her head and kept his voice at barely a breath. Don't move. Don't look. Just stay with me. Dad, I've got you. He pulled her tighter behind the column. I've got you. Don't make a sound. Around them, the lobby devolved into the choreography of terror. Tellers dropping behind their stations. A woman near the back screaming once before someone else grabbed her arm and pulled her down. An older man in a gray suit, banker or lawyer, something in that category, flat on the floor with his hands spread wide like he was trying to show the marble how harmless he was. Nathan counted the hostages. 31 people visible, more in the back offices. The security guards, 2 he'd spotted during the 22 minutes of line standing, were already disarmed. One of them was on his knees, hands behind his head, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who understood that his job description had never included this scenario. The second guard was on the floor, face down. Nathan watched his chest. Still breathing. The blow to his head had been controlled, efficient, which was another detail that didn't add up for a standard robbery. A woman in a charcoal blazer was being walked across the lobby by the gunman who'd swept left. She wasn't stumbling, she wasn't begging, she was walking with her chin up and her jaw set like she was pissed off rather than scared, which either meant she had extraordinary nerve or she'd had a second to process something Nathan hadn't yet. Late 20s, early 30s, dark hair, pulled back. The blazer was good quality. She was wearing a visitor badge clipped to the lapel. No, not a visitor badge, an executive badge. Her name on it, O. Sterling. Below that, Meridian Trust, Executive Suite, Level 3. Level 3. She wasn't a hostage. She was the target. Nathan filed that away and kept scanning. The man who'd given the initial order was standing at the center of the lobby now, rifle down at his side in a way that was more threatening than if he'd been pointing it at someone. He had the relaxed posture of a person who was exactly where he planned to be. I want everyone to hear me very clearly, he said. His voice was flat. No regional accent. Whatever he'd started out sounding like, he'd sanded it down to something neutral and controlled. We are not interested in anyone in this room except one person. You cooperate, you stay quiet, and in a few hours every single one of you goes home. Your families never know this happened. That's the deal. Anybody makes this complicated. He let it sit there. One of the other gunmen started moving through the hostages on the floor, pulling phones, dropping them into a bag. Fast, methodical. He'd done this before, too. Emma was absolutely still against Nathan's side. He could feel her heartbeat. Fast, but she wasn't shaking, which was more than he could have hoped for. He'd read her too many books where kids in bad situations figured something out and saved the day, and right now he was grateful for every single one of them, because at least she understood that staying quiet was an action. Hey! The voice came from his left, low, controlled under the ambient sounds of movement and sniffling. Nathan turned slightly. A man about 10 feet away, mid-40s, had shifted to face him. White button-down, sleeves rolled up. He'd ended up behind a neighboring column when everything started. His eyes were sharp, not panicked, the eyes of someone working through the situation rather than drowning in it. You see what I see? The man whispered. Nathan said nothing for 2 seconds. Then, yeah. 2 more guys, you think? Back offices? At least 1. Probably 2. Nathan glanced toward the rear corridor, which was now sealed off by the gunmen who'd cleared left. They've got coverage on every exit I can see. The man in the white shirt studied him. You're not a banker. Construction. Right. The man didn't believe him, but he moved on. My name's Gerald. Nathan. Is that your daughter? Yes. Gerald looked at Emma, who looked back at him with the steady evaluating stare that kids sometimes aimed at adults when they were trying to figure out if the adult was trustworthy. She okay? She's fine. Nathan pulled her slightly closer. She's going to stay fine. Gerald nodded slowly, then his eyes tracked back across the lobby to where O. Sterling was being guided, roughly, but without actual violence, toward the executive elevator corridor. The gang leader was walking beside her, talking to her. Whatever he was saying, she wasn't responding. They came for her specifically, Gerald said. Yeah. That changes what this is. Yeah, Nathan said again. It does. Across the lobby, the woman in the charcoal blazer stopped walking. The gang leader had his hand on her arm and she just stopped. let her weight go still. It wasn't defiance exactly, it was something more deliberate than that. "Tell me what you want," she said, loud enough to carry. Her voice was steady, furious underneath, but steady. "Because I know you didn't come here for my company's petty cash." The gang leader looked at her. Something shifted in his posture. Not surprise. He'd expected resistance, but a kind of recalibration. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "we're going to go upstairs and you're going to open the encrypted partition on the level 3 servers. That's all." "That's all," she repeated, flat. "The files we need, the authentication key. And then everyone in this building walks out with their evening intact." She looked at him for a long moment. Nathan watched her face from across the lobby. She was calculating, processing. She had the expression of someone who understood exactly what was at stake and was burning through options at high speed, the same way Nathan was burning through his own. "And if I don't?" she said. The leader glanced around the lobby, at the 60-plus people on the floor, at the phones in the bag, at his own men positioned at every exit. He looked back at her. "Then we start making the decision for you," he said. Olivia Sterling closed her mouth. She let herself be guided toward the elevator corridor, but her eyes swept the lobby one more time before she disappeared from view, and for just a moment they landed on Nathan. He wasn't sure what she saw. A construction worker with his kid. A man who didn't look like he belonged in a bank on the Upper West Side at 5 in the afternoon. Whatever she saw, something made her look twice. Then she was gone, and Nathan was back to the lobby. One of the gunmen, younger than the others, moving with slightly less patience, was working his way along the row of hostages on the floor, checking zip ties, checking phones. He had a nervous energy that the others didn't, faster footsteps, eyes that moved too much. Nathan clocked him and made a note. Emma tilted her head up very slowly. She wasn't looking at the gunman. She was looking at Nathan. Her voice was so quiet it was barely sound at all. "Daddy." "Yeah, Bug. Are we in trouble?" He looked at her. The gold-green eyes, the smudge of dirt on her left cheek from where she'd been crouching on the floor before he'd pulled her up. She was scared. He could see it, but she was holding it together with both hands. "No," he said quietly. "Promise?" He thought about what promises meant, what they cost, what they meant coming from a man who'd made them in worse places than this and had mostly kept them. "Yeah," he said, "I promise." He shifted his weight slightly, getting a better angle on the lobby's geometry. The column positions, the distance to the elevator corridor, the blind spots created by the teller stations along the right wall, the rear corridor, the ceiling, the light fixtures, the position of each gunman relative to each other. Gerald was watching him again, not saying anything, just watching. Nathan Cross let out one quiet breath through his nose. He began to plan. The first 20 minutes were the worst kind of quiet, not actual quiet. There was plenty of noise, muffled crying from somewhere near the teller stations, the occasional crackle of a radio that one of the gunmen kept checking, then silencing, the sound of footsteps moving back and forth across marble in patterns that Nathan had already memorized. But underneath all of it was the specific silence of 60-something people trying very hard not to breathe too loud, which was its own kind of noise, the noise of collective fear pressing itself flat against the floor and hoping not to be noticed. Nathan had counted the hostages 3 times now, 61 in the main lobby, somewhere between 4 and 6 more in the back offices, based on the sounds that came through the sealed corridor door every time one of the gunmen opened it to pass through. The executive section on the far right had gone completely silent after Olivia Sterling was taken upstairs, which meant either the people up there were very good at being still, or there were fewer of them than he'd originally estimated. He'd settled Emma against the base of the column with her back to the wall and her knees pulled up. She had a crease on her left cheek from where she'd been pressing it against his jacket. She wasn't crying, she was watching the room with the same careful attention he was, which was either a good sign or a troubling one, depending on how you looked at it. "You're doing good," he told her quietly. "I know," she said. Then after a pause, "My legs are falling asleep." "Shift your weight a little, slow." She did. One of the gunmen, the younger one, the one with the nervous footsteps, glanced in their direction. Nathan put his hand on Emma's shoulder, and they both went still. The gunmen looked away. Gerald had moved slightly closer over the past 10 minutes. Not dramatically, just a few inches at a time, the way you moved when you were trying to not look like you were moving. He was now close enough that Nathan could hear him breathe. "They've been up there a while," Gerald murmured. "Yeah." "You think she's giving them what they want?" Nathan watched the elevator corridor. "No." "How do you know?" "The way she walked in." He kept his voice below the ambient sounds of the lobby. "She wasn't scared enough. She was angry." Gerald was quiet for a moment, processing that. Angry people make bad decisions. "Sometimes," Nathan said. "Sometimes they make very good ones." He was still thinking about the way she'd looked at him before they took her upstairs. That twice-over glance. Most people in a crisis looked through strangers, not at them. Their attention contracted down to their own survival, their own fear. She'd looked at him like she was trying to read something, like she was cataloging him the same way he'd been cataloging the room. The radio crackled again. The gunman nearest to the entrance turned away from the lobby to answer it, which gave Nathan a clean 3-second window to shift his position slightly and get a better sightline on the rear corridor. He used it. 2 gunmen visible in the main space right now. The nervous one, and a bigger man near the teller stations who hadn't moved much and seemed to be the most comfortable of the group, which usually meant the most experienced. The gang leader was upstairs. That left at least 1, probably 2, unaccounted for. He ran the math. 4 confirmed from the initial entry. At least 1 more covering the server room or wherever they'd taken Sterling. That was 5 minimum. Could be 6. A woman a few feet to Nathan's left shifted against the floor and let out a shaky breath. Late 40s, practical clothes, not a banker, probably a customer. She'd been holding herself together since the beginning, but something in the past few minutes had started to fray. Nathan could see it in the way her hands were pressed flat against the marble, fingers splayed like she was trying to anchor herself through the floor. He caught her eye. She looked at him, startled to be seen. He didn't say anything, just held her gaze for a moment. Steady, calm. The way you looked at someone when you needed them to understand that panic was a choice, and right now was not the time to make it. She blinked, took 1 slow breath. Her hands relaxed slightly. Nathan looked away. Gerald had noticed. "You do that on purpose?" he asked. "Do what?" "That thing with your face." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Right," Gerald said for the second time in a way that meant the opposite. The elevator corridor doors opened. Every head in the lobby that had been cautiously raised snapped back down. Nathan didn't drop his. He watched the gang leader come back through the doors alone, his rifle held at a low ready, and the expression on his face had shifted from the controlled blankness of earlier to something tighter around the jaw. Not angry, frustrated, which meant Olivia Sterling had said no. The leader walked to the center of the lobby. He looked at the room the way you looked at a problem you'd expected to be easier. "All right," he said, not loud, almost conversational. That was the part that made Nathan's stomach drop. Not the volume, but the register. Loud people were scared. Quiet people who didn't need to be loud had already decided something. "We're going to speed this up a little bit." He nodded to the bigger man near the teller stations, who immediately moved toward the group of hostages clustered there and grabbed the nearest one. A young man, maybe 22, in a bank uniform. "Teller." He hauled him upright. The teller made a sound that was half surprise, half something worse. "She needs motivation," the leader said, still conversational, still quiet. "We're going to provide some." "Hey!" The voice came from Nathan's right, and it took him a half-second to realize it was his own. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. He was already pushing himself slightly up from his crouch, not standing, staying low, but visible. "Hey, there's no reason to do that." Every gunman in the lobby found him at once. That particular kind of attention had a physical weight to it. The leader turned. He looked at Nathan for a moment, really looked, the way people who were good at reading rooms looked at unexpected variables. "Sir?" he said. Get back down on the floor. He's just a kid, Nathan said. He kept his hands open and visible. His voice was level. He's not going to change your mind. You know that. Hurting him doesn't get you what you need. The teller was shaking. The bigger gunman still had him by the collar, watching the leader for a signal. The leader studied Nathan. You're going to get back on the floor, he said, and you're going to stay there. This is your one courtesy. Okay. Nathan went back down. Slow, deliberate, hands still visible. Okay. He'd gotten what he needed anyway. A clear look at the leader's face when something unexpected happened. The man had stayed composed. His hands hadn't moved. His breathing hadn't changed. That told Nathan more than anything else could have about who he was dealing with. Gerald was staring at him. That was either very brave or very stupid, he whispered. Probably the second one, Nathan said. Emma had her chin tucked down, her eyes up, watching her father with an expression that was impossible to read. He reached over and squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. The leader was on the radio again, facing away. The teller had been pushed back to the floor, unhurt for now, though the threat sat in the room like smoke. Not visible exactly, but present in every breath. Nathan used the moment to ease himself a few inches further along the column, getting a better angle on the lobby's right side. There was a blind spot behind the second column in the executive row, roughly 30 feet from the elevator corridor. He'd noticed it when they first came in, while Emma was doing her grout tracing investigation. The camera mounted in the upper right corner of the lobby covered the teller stations and the main entrance, but its angle didn't reach behind that column cluster, which meant the gunmen were also relying on line of sight rather than surveillance to monitor the right side of the room. He started to think about the hostages between here and that blind spot. Who was mobile, who wasn't? Who was aware enough to move on a quiet signal, and who was too deep in their own fear to respond to anything below a shout? The woman he'd made eye contact with, the one who'd been pressing her hands flat on the floor, was about 12 feet away. She was breathing slower now, still scared but functioning. There was an older man near the center of the lobby who'd been so still for so long that Nathan had initially worried about him, but he'd seen him shift twice, and both times it had been deliberate and controlled. Ex-military, maybe, or just someone with a high threshold for keeping themselves in check. Either way, he was someone Nathan could work with. A teenage girl near the teller stations had her eyes closed and her lips moving slightly, not making sound. She'd been that way for 10 minutes. Whatever she was telling herself, it was keeping her calm, and Nathan wasn't going to interfere with that. He was still building the map in his head, the human geography of the lobby, which was as important as the physical one, when the elevator corridor doors opened again and Olivia Sterling walked back through them. She wasn't being pushed this time. She was walking, and the man behind her was keeping pace but not controlling her, which meant something had shifted upstairs. She looked different than she had 20 minutes ago. Not more scared, but more resolved, like a decision had settled in and she'd stopped fighting with herself about it. She scanned the lobby as she crossed it, not panicked scanning, deliberate. She was looking for something specific. She found Nathan. He watched her eyes stop on him and hold. She'd been looking for him specifically, which meant she'd been thinking about him upstairs while they were pushing her toward those servers, while she was making whatever decision she'd made. The construction worker with the kid who hadn't looked scared when everything fell apart. The leader had his hand on her arm, steering her back toward the elevator. She was talking to him and Nathan caught pieces of it, not doing anything until, and water at least, and then something lower that he couldn't make out. The leader stopped, looked at the room, looked at Nathan specifically. You, he said, bring your daughter and sit over there. He pointed to the executive seating area near the corridor. Ms. Sterling has requested that the child not be on the marble floor. Nathan went very still. It was a manipulation. He knew that immediately and completely. Moving him closer to Sterling, or moving Sterling to a position where she had something to lose beyond herself. Either way, it served the leader's purpose. But Emma's knees were on marble, and she'd been on that floor for going on 40 minutes, and the alternative was refusing a direct instruction from a man holding a rifle. He stood up, took Emma's hand, walked across the lobby at the pace of someone who was not in a hurry and was not afraid, which was its own kind of message. A few of the hostages watched him cross. Gerald tracked him with his eyes. The older man near the center of the lobby looked up as Nathan passed, and Nathan let his gaze drop for a half-second to the column cluster on the right, then back up. Just that. The older man blinked once, slowly. Message received, or it wasn't. The executive seating area was 3 leather chairs and a low table, cordoned from the main lobby by a low divider that was entirely decorative. Nathan settled Emma into the furthest chair and crouched in front of her. "You good?" he said quietly. "Better than the floor," she said. "Yeah," he almost smiled. "Better than the floor." He straightened up and turned, and Olivia Sterling was 4 feet away from him, standing with her arms crossed and her eyes direct. Up close, she looked younger than he'd estimated from across the lobby. Early 30s, maybe, though there was something around her eyes that wasn't age exactly, but the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. "You're not a construction worker," she said. Low, flat, no question mark on the end of it. "I am, actually." "Okay." She glanced at Emma, then back at him. "You're also something else." A gunman was positioned 8 feet away, close enough to hear normal conversation. Nathan kept his voice at the edge of audible. "What do they want from you?" She looked at him for a moment like she was deciding how much to spend. Then, encrypted files, financial records, evidence of a series of transactions that it doesn't matter the details. The point is they're not getting them. Why? Because the second those files leave my control, there's no reason to keep anyone in this building alive. She said it very evenly, like she'd already worked through the emotional weight of it and come out the other side. "They're not here to rob the bank. They're here to erase me. The files are the only thing buying time right now." Nathan processed that. Outside, through the bank's narrow, high windows, he could see the color of the light changing, late afternoon going toward early evening. Sometime in the past half hour, the traffic sounds from West 54th had changed too, dropping off in a way that didn't match rush hour patterns. "There's a perimeter outside," he said. "I assumed. They're not coming in." "I know." She uncrossed her arms. "Explosives. They told me. Throughout the lobby. Remote detonation." He'd suspected something like it. The confidence of the team, the lack of urgency about a police presence outside. You didn't project that kind of calm about an exterior perimeter unless you had an answer to it. "How many devices? Where?" "I don't know exactly. He told me enough to make the point. The lobby, maybe the stairwells." Nathan turned very slightly and let his eyes move across the lobby floor. Looked at the positions the gunmen had taken up early before they started moving people around. The corners, the base of the 2 load-bearing columns near the entrance, the area under the reception desk that nobody had gone near since the siege started. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay what?" "Okay, I understand the situation." "That's it? That's your reaction?" He looked at her. "What do you want me to say?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Emma, who was sitting in the leather chair with her sneakers dangling above the floor, watching them both with that quiet, serious attention. "How old is she?" 7. "She's very calm for 7. "She's very calm for any age," Nathan said, which was true and was also the thing that scared him most about his daughter, because he knew where she'd learned it. "Tell me about the server room. Layout, where they're taking you." Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because knowing the building's geometry matters." "It matters for what?" He looked at the gunman 8 feet away, still facing toward the main lobby, not toward them, not close enough to hear if they kept it low. "Just tell me." She studied him for another second. Then she started talking. "The level 3 executive floor had 2 server rooms," she explained. "A primary and a backup, separated by a corridor about 40 feet long. The encrypted partition they wanted was in the primary room, accessible only through a biometric lock that required her specific authentication. The backup room was connected to the building's electrical grid management, which meant it also had access to the security system, cameras, electronic locks, the lobby's automated barriers. "The electronic lockdown," Nathan said. "On the exits. Controlled from there, yes." She paused. "Why does that matter?" "Because there are 61 people in this lobby who need a way out." She was quiet. The gunman by the corridor shifted his weight, One of the others across the lobby started moving along the hostage line again with the methodical patience of someone who'd done security work, looking for phones they might have missed, checking that nobody's zip tie had loosened. "You have a plan," Olivia said. It wasn't a question this time either. "I have the beginning of one." "What does that mean?" "It means I know what needs to happen. I don't know all of how yet." He looked at her directly. "If something starts, if you see something happen in this room and it moves fast, I need you to be ready to move." "Move where?" "Up. Back to the server room." She stared at him. "You want me to go back up there voluntarily? If you can get into the backup room and kill the electronic lockdown on the lobby exits, people can get out. That's 61 people. And the explosives? One problem at a time." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's not very reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you," he said. "I'm trying to give you something to do." Something shifted in her face then. Not softening exactly, more like recognition. She'd probably spent the last 40 minutes being told to cooperate, being pushed, being given no options. He was handing her an option, even a hard one, even a dangerous one. "What's your name?" she said. "Nathan." "Olivia." She paused. "What do you actually do, Nathan, when you're not doing construction?" "I told you, construction." She looked at the way he was standing, the way his eyes hadn't stopped moving since she'd walked over, the way he'd placed himself between Emma and the nearest gunman without making it look like that's what he was doing. "You're very bad at lying," she said. "I'm actually pretty good at it." "Okay." She glanced past him toward the lobby. The nervous gunman had drifted back toward the entrance, and the distance between him and the bigger man near the tellers had opened up. "How long do we have before they decide I've run out of time?" "Not long. He'll push you for the files again in the next 20 minutes. And if I keep saying no," Nathan looked across at the hostages on the floor, the teller who'd been grabbed earlier, the woman who'd been pressing her hands flat on the marble, Gerald, still in his spot near the column, watching the room. "Then they'll find a different way to motivate you," he said. Olivia followed his gaze, her jaw tightened. "I know. So when they come back for you, stall. Ask for water. Ask for anything. Every minute matters right now." "And you'll use those minutes to do what?" He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he looked at Emma, who was watching him with those green-gold eyes, and something in his chest did the thing it always did when he looked at her too long. That specific ache that lived somewhere between love and terror, the feeling of having exactly one thing in the world you couldn't afford to lose. "Just be ready to move," he said. He crossed back to Emma's chair and sat down on the arm of it, close enough that she could lean against him, which she did, immediately, like she'd been waiting. "What were you talking to that lady about?" she murmured. "The plan," he said. She looked up at him. "We have a plan?" He put his arm around her shoulders, watched the lobby, watched the positions, the distances, the patterns of movement that the gunmen had settled into without realizing they'd settled into them. The nervous one near the entrance hadn't stayed still for more than 90 seconds at a stretch. The bigger man near the tellers checked his watch every few minutes, waiting for a signal, or a deadline, or both. Nathan began to time the intervals. "Yeah, Bug," he said quietly. "We have a plan." He was still timing them, still building the sequence in his head, when the nervous gunman stopped his pacing and turned toward the executive seating area. His eyes moved across the hostages and landed on Emma. He walked toward them, slowly, rifle angled down, and something in his expression had gone from professional blankness to something else, impatient or bored or both, which was a combination that made Nathan's pulse pick up in a way that the initial raid had not. "Hey," the gunman said. He was talking to Nathan. "Your kid comfortable enough?" Nathan looked up at him. "She's fine. Everybody else is on the floor." He gestured with the rifle barrel, not pointing it, just indicating. "You don't get special treatment." "You put us over here," Nathan said, "and now I'm moving you back." He reached past Nathan and grabbed Emma's arm. Nathan was already moving when Emma made a sound. Not thinking, not planning. The part of him that had been calculating and mapping and running scenarios for the past 45 minutes stepped aside, and something older and faster and considerably less patient took over. And the only coherent thought he had in the half second before everything changed was that nobody was going to put their hands on his daughter. Not today. Not in this building. Not ever. It took less than 3 seconds. That was the part nobody who witnessed it could fully explain afterward. Not the teller who'd been zip-tied near the stations, not Gerald, not the woman who'd been pressing her hands flat on the marble. 3 seconds was how long it took Nathan Cross to go from sitting on the arm of a leather chair to standing over an unconscious man on the floor. And in between those 2 points, there was a sequence of events that the human eye could technically track, but the human brain had trouble assembling into a coherent order. The gunman had grabbed Emma's arm. Emma had made a sound. Not a scream, more like a sharp exhale. The sound of surprise rather than pain, but it didn't matter because Nathan had already moved. He came off the chair arm sideways, low, driving his left forearm into the gunman's elbow joint at exactly the angle required to break the grip without triggering a reflexive finger movement. The rifle swung wide. Nathan's right hand found the back of the man's neck on the follow-through, and he used the gunman's own forward momentum to bring him down onto the marble with controlled, specific force. Not enough to kill, enough to end the conversation immediately. The rifle clattered free. Nathan had it before it stopped sliding. The whole lobby seemed to inhale at once and hold it. Across the room, the bigger man near the teller stations had already brought his weapon up, and Nathan was behind the column before the man's eye reached the scope. He pressed his back against the marble, rifle in hand, and took exactly 1 breath. Emma was still in the chair. She hadn't moved. She was staring at him with an expression he'd never quite seen on her face before. Not fear, not shock, something in between that he didn't have a name for. "Get down," he told her. Quiet. No room for argument. She slid off the chair and flattened against the base of it. Good girl. He'd never been more terrified in his life. The bigger man was shouting something toward the elevator corridor, getting the word out. Nathan had maybe 15 seconds before the geometry of the lobby changed dramatically, and he spent them moving, not charging across open floor, but working the columns, using the angles he'd been studying for the past hour, staying low and lateral and away from the main lines of sight. Gerald had not moved from his spot, but the older man near the center of the lobby, the one Nathan had given the half-second look toward the column cluster, had very quietly gotten himself upright and shifted position. He understood. The radio on the unconscious gunman's vest crackled. Nathan could hear the voice on the other end, even from here, sharp, urgent, asking for a status report that wasn't coming. The bigger man near the tellers had abandoned his post and was moving toward the executive area where the unconscious gunman was, which put his back toward the teller stations. Nathan was already moving in the opposite direction from what the man expected, cutting through the gap between the second and third columns, closing distance from the flank. He hit the man from the left, and the struggle was short and ugly and nothing like the movies. Not clean, not efficient, a lot of grunting, and one moment where Nathan took an elbow to the cheekbone that lit up his vision white for a half-second before he got the man's arm locked and torqued it past the point where fighting back was a rational option. The man went down cursing in a low, furious voice. Nathan zip-tied his wrists with the man's own restraints, took his radio, took his weapon. His cheekbone was going to be spectacular tomorrow. He didn't have time to think about that. 2 down, 3 or 4 to go, and those remaining were now aware that something had changed. He was back behind cover before the elevator corridor doors burst open. The man who came through them was not the gang leader. It was one of the unaccounted-for members. 5th man, the one Nathan had estimated but not confirmed. He was moving fast, scanning the lobby, and Nathan watched him process the scene. One of his people down near the executive chairs, the second down near the tellers, hostages on the floor, one specific section of the lobby looking very wrong. "Where is he?" the man shouted. Not to anyone in particular, to the room. Gerald, to his eternal credit, did not look in Nathan's direction. The 5th man moved toward the center of the lobby, trying to get a sight line on all 4 compass points at once, which meant he was trying to hold too much space alone and knew it. His movements had that overextended quality. Too much to cover, not enough support. Nathan came around the 3rd column at floor level, staying below the man's natural eye line, and covered the distance between them in a fast crawl and rise that ended with him inside the man's reach before the rifle could be brought to bear. Close quarters was always brutal. It was also always faster than people expected. The man was trained. He tried to create separation, tried to get his elbow up. But Nathan had the weapon controlled with his left hand and his right was already working the problem. And 20 seconds later, the fifth man was face down on the marble with his hands secured behind him. Nathan knelt beside him, breathing hard, and did a quick check. Pulse strong, airways clear. He was going to wake up with a headache and a serious grudge. But he was going to wake up. Around the lobby, people had begun to raise their heads. "Stay down," Nathan said. Not harsh, not a shout, just level and clear, carrying enough to reach everyone in the room. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move until I tell you." A few heads went back down. A few didn't. The teller who'd been grabbed earlier, the young one, was staring at Nathan from across the room with an expression of total disbelief. 3 men neutralized. Nathan had the rifle from the first, the radio from the second. He could hear voices on the radio now. 2 distinct voices, which meant the gang leader and at least one more person unaccounted for. They knew something was wrong. They didn't know what yet. He needed to use that window. He crossed to Gerald quickly, crouching beside him. "You said you were watching the room," he said. Gerald blinked. "I did not say that." "You were doing it anyway. How many people in this lobby can move if I need them to move?" Gerald looked at the room, really looked at it, the way Nathan had been doing, and Nathan watched him recalibrate, dropping the banker or whatever he was and pulling up something older. The older man near center, the woman in the blue jacket who stopped crying 20 minutes ago. Maybe the guy by the far wall, he's been watching you since you took down the first one. That's 3. "I make 4, Gerald said. Nathan looked at him. "I was in the army," Gerald said. "Long time ago. I'm slow now, and my knee is garbage, but I'm not useless. I need someone to keep people calm and moving when the exit's open. Not combat, just movement. That I can do. Okay?" Nathan gripped his shoulder once, briefly. "Okay." He moved. The elevator corridor was the problem. The lobby was 3 down, but the leader was upstairs with Olivia, and at least one more person he hadn't fully placed yet. Going into that corridor meant going into a choke point, 1 entrance, no lateral cover, a straight line that favored whoever was at the far end. He didn't love it. He also didn't have another option. He was at the corridor entrance, back against the wall, when his radio crackled. The gang leader's voice. Quiet, controlled. "I know you can hear this." Nathan looked at the radio, said nothing. "You've done well," the voice said. "Really. Better than I expected from anyone in that lobby, but you're not thinking about the right problem." Nathan moved to the corridor door and eased it open 2 inches, listening for footsteps, for positioning. "The device is in the lobby," the leader continued. "You're thinking about coming up here, I understand that. But the moment you come through those elevator doors, I press the button, and we have a very different kind of problem." A pause. "So here's what I'd like you to do. Set the weapons down. Walk your daughter to the front entrance and tell the people outside you're coming out. I'll give you 60 seconds to clear. That's my offer." Nathan let the door close without going through. He pressed his back against the wall and thought. The offer was real, in the way that bullets were real. Technically true, but designed to end something. If he walked out, everyone left in the lobby was a liability with no purpose. If the files were already upstairs, or if they'd already copied them in the time Olivia had bought. "Nathan." The voice came from above him. Not the radio, actual voice, from the stairwell. He looked up. Olivia Sterling was at the top of the emergency staircase, partially visible through the reinforced glass panel in the stairwell door. Her face was cut, something across her cheekbone, not deep but bleeding, and her blazer was gone, sleeves pushed up. She had something in her hand, small, a room card or an access chip. She held it up where he could see it. Then she pointed back toward the door she'd come through, mouthed something he couldn't fully make out, and pointed down, toward the lobby, toward the exits. He understood. She hadn't gone back to the primary server room. She'd found a way to the backup. He held up 3 fingers, then swept them to the right, toward where the lobby exits were. She nodded. Got it. He held up his fist. Wait. She nodded again. Then she looked back over her shoulder at something he couldn't see, and the look on her face told him that whatever was behind that door was not going to give her much more time. He was already moving. The stairwell was his best approach now, not the elevator, which would announce him. He went through the corridor door fast and low, took the stairs 2 at a time, and came out onto level 3 into the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but waiting. The hallway was long, fluorescent lit, carpet that swallowed footsteps. 2 doors on the left, 1 on the right at the far end. The backup server room door was on the left, middle. It was hanging slightly open. He pushed through it. Olivia was at the terminal. Her hands were moving fast over the keyboard, the access chip inserted into a reader on the panel's side, and she didn't look up when he came in, but she said, 3 minutes, maybe less. What happened to your face? One of them caught me in the corridor when I came back down. I got past him. How? Fire extinguisher, she said. Don't look at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything. You have a very expressive face for someone who's pretending to be calm. He went to the door and checked the corridor. Clear for now. The gang leader said something about a detonator. Remote. How confident was he when he said it? Very. She hit a command sequence and the screen shifted to a building schematic. He wasn't bluffing. I watched him check the receiver twice while we were upstairs. He's the type who checks things twice. Careful man. Paranoid man. There's a difference. Her finger stopped. The schematic on screen highlighted 4 points in the lobby. 2 near the entrance columns, 1 beneath the reception desk, 1 in the stairwell on the east side. There they are. Nathan looked at the screen. The stairwell device explained why he hadn't been meant to use it. Can you disable them from here? Disable? No. The devices themselves are standalone. They're not networked into the building system, but I can cut the signal relay. She pointed to a subsystem on the schematic, a communications panel that ran through the building's internal infrastructure. If the building relay goes dark, the remote detonator signal can't reach the receivers. It just doesn't get there. How long does that buy us? Depends on whether he has a manual backup trigger on the devices themselves. He's a careful man, Nathan said. Paranoid, she corrected. So yes, probably. How long to kill the lobby exit's electronic lockdown? Already started. She pulled up a second window. This is going to take 90 seconds to push through the system. The exits, the barriers, the fire door on the east ground level, all of it. And then we have a lobby full of people who can run. If they know to run. She glanced at him. Gerald? He raised an eyebrow. I heard you talking to him before everything happened. She turned back to the screen. He seemed like the type who'd organize people. He was in the army. Of course he was. She exhaled. Okay. 70 seconds. A sound from the corridor. Footsteps. Measured, not panicked. Someone who knew the building. Nathan moved to the door and looked through the crack. The 6th man, yes, the one he'd never confirmed, who'd been somewhere on this floor the entire time, was coming down the corridor from the primary server room. Not running, not shouting, just moving toward this door with the quiet purpose of someone who'd been given an order. Nathan pulled back from the door. Your fire extinguisher trick works twice? Once was already pushing it. She didn't look up. 50 seconds. Okay. He looked around the server room. Server racks, equipment carts, a chair on wheels, a fire panel on the wall with a glass cover. He picked up the chair. Stay low and don't stop typing. I wasn't planning to. The door opened. The 6th man came through fast and low. Trained entry, checking left, then right. And Nathan was already in motion from the right, bringing the chair into the man's path, not as a weapon, but as an obstacle. The rolling collision taking the man off his balance, and Nathan was on him before he recovered, using the equipment rack as a brace point, working through a leverage problem that his body remembered better than his conscious mind did. It wasn't clean. The man got a hand free and caught Nathan across the jaw before the joint lock engaged, and Nathan felt the impact travel all the way up into his skull, and for a half second he was operating on autopilot and muscle memory alone, his training doing the work while his brain caught up. The man went down. Nathan's knee was on his back and his wrist was at an angle that prevented any further discussion. 20 seconds, Olivia said behind him. Nathan looked up at her. She was still typing. Her face was bleeding steadily down her cheekbone, and she hadn't wiped it, and her hands on the keyboard were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, he thought, but from the specific kind of adrenaline that came with doing something terrifying while forcing yourself to focus on something precise. You okay? He said. Ask me in 30 seconds, she said. He zip-tied the sixth man's wrists with the man's own restraints. He was running low on those, and stood up. His jaw was going to match his cheekbone. Spectacular didn't cover it. Done, Olivia said. On the schematic, the lobby exits turned green one by one. The barriers, the fire door, the main entrance's electronic bolts, all of it. Lobby is open, she said. Anyone down there can walk out right now. Nathan grabbed his radio, clicked it twice. The signal he'd told Gerald to listen for, the thing he'd said in 10 words while crossing the lobby that Gerald had remembered because trained men remembered things like that. 2 clicks meant move. He listened. Through the radio, very faintly, he could hear the change in the lobby below. The sound of the barriers disengaging, the mechanical thunk of bolts releasing, and then the specific rising noise of people who had been holding completely still beginning to move. Gerald's voice, clear and carrying. Exit is open. Go. Single file. Keep moving. Don't stop. Nathan exhaled. They're going, Olivia said. She was watching the security feed on the backup system screen, the lobby camera, showing the hostages beginning to rise, beginning to move toward the front doors, the east fire door, the barriers that were no longer barriers. Gerald was on his feet, directing. The older man was helping someone up from the floor. They're actually going. Yeah, Nathan said. She turned to look at him. There was something in her face that she was working to keep back. Not tears exactly, more the feeling that came just before them, the moment where the body decided it had held on long enough and was going to start letting things out whether the mind was ready or not. She pressed her mouth together and got it under control. Emma, she said. Gerald has her. He was already moving toward the door. He knows. You told him to specifically. Yes. She followed him into the corridor. The building felt different now. The occupant pressure of 60-plus people in one room had been relieved, and the space had that evacuated quality, like air rushing into a vacuum. Their footsteps were the only ones in the stairwell going down. They came out into the lobby just as the last cluster of hostages was making it through the main entrance. Gerald was at the door, holding it, counting people through with the automatic, specific attention of someone who'd done head counts before. He saw Nathan and gave a single nod. Emma was beside him, holding his hand. Nathan crossed the lobby in 12 steps. Emma let go of Gerald's hand and covered the remaining distance herself, and he caught her and picked her up in one motion and held her in a way he didn't usually let himself in public, both arms, all of his weight adjusted to hers, his face in her hair. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Some things didn't need language. When he put her down, she looked up at him and assessed his face with the professional seriousness of a 7-year-old who had decided feelings could wait. Your cheek is really bad, she said. I know. Does it hurt? Not yet. That's what you said about your hand that time with the saw. Yeah, and I was right then, too. He straightened up. I'm going to need you to go outside with Gerald right now. Her face did the thing where she was calculating how much to push. What about you? I'll be right behind you. You always say that. Em. She looked at him, looked at Olivia, who had come to stand a few feet away, blood still tracking down her cheek, watching them with an expression that was somewhere between respect and something more private. Then she looked back at Nathan. Okay, she said, but if you're not outside in 5 minutes... 4 minutes, he said. Go. Gerald had his hand out, and Emma took it, and the two of them went through the main entrance into the evening light outside, and Nathan turned back to the lobby. Olivia was already facing the elevator corridor. He's still up there, she said. Yeah. He has the detonator. Yeah. Nathan looked at the 4 points on the building schematic still open on the security tablet she'd carried down. The signal relay was dark, but a manual trigger on the devices themselves, direct wiring, physical backup, that was a different problem. A paranoid man's backup for his backup. Tell me exactly what he said about it, when he mentioned it to you. Every word. She thought back. He said the building would come down around everyone's ears before he let it go to waste. He held up the device. It was a phone, actually, modified. He showed me what looked like a detonation app. And he said, she paused. He said the primary trigger and the backup trigger were on the same device. Nathan looked at her. Same device. Same phone. He was quiet for a moment, running it. One device. Primary signal trigger and manual backup on the same hardware, which meant if the device was gone, both triggers were gone. No phone, no detonation. Either way. He's going to know the lobby is empty by now, Nathan said. He'll be coming down? Or setting it off. If he was going to set it off the moment he lost control, he'd have done it already. Nathan checked the weapons he'd taken. One rifle, one sidearm. He set the rifle against the wall. Too much in a confined space, too much risk of a stray round hitting something structural near a device. He kept the sidearm. He wants to walk out of here. The explosives are leverage, not preference. The moment he decides he can't walk out, that changes. So we have a window. Small one. She looked at the sidearm, looked at him. What do you need me to do? Get behind the reception desk and stay down. If you hear shooting, you stay down. If you hear nothing for more than 2 minutes, you go through the east fire door. And if, Olivia, he looked at her directly, please just do this one thing without arguing. She closed her mouth, then, surprising him, you're bossy for a construction worker. I've been told. She went. He watched her get behind the desk, and then he turned toward the elevator corridor, and for a moment the lobby was completely still around him. Marble and brass and the lingering smell of 60 people's fear, and 4 devices sitting in the walls and floor that could bring it all down, and one man upstairs who was running his own calculations right now about how badly his night had gone. Nathan Cross had not been in a situation like this in 3 years. He told himself when he left that he'd never be in one again. That had seemed reasonable at the time. It had seemed like a choice he was making freely, a door he was closing and walking away from. The door had apparently found him. He moved to the elevator corridor, and he pushed through the door, and he went to find the man at the top of the building before the man at the top of the building decided the night was a total loss. The elevator was sitting open on the ground floor, which meant it hadn't been called back up. Nathan took the stairs instead, the same stairwell staying to the wall side, moving as quietly as marble and his work boots would allow, which wasn't silent but was close enough. He came out on level 3 and the corridor was empty. The primary server room door was standing open. He went to the doorway and looked in. The gang leader was at the main terminal. He wasn't trying to access it. He'd clearly already understood that whatever window he'd had for the files was closed. He was standing with his back to the door, looking at the screen, and in his right hand was the phone, the modified device. Primary trigger and manual backup, same hardware, same hand. He didn't turn around, but he knew Nathan was there. How many of my people are down? He said. 4, Nathan said. 4. A pause. You're good. I've had practice. I can tell. The leader turned around slowly. He had the phone in his right hand and his rifle in his left, and he was looking at Nathan with an expression that had moved past frustration into something flatter and more dangerous. The look of a man doing pure calculation. You know what I'm holding? Yeah. Then you know how this works. You back out of that door, you give me the south stairwell, and I walk out of this building. He held up the phone. Otherwise, I make this building's structural engineer very unhappy. Nathan looked at the phone, looked at the man, looked at the distance between them, which was about 15 feet. Not far, but not close either. He put the sidearm on the floor. The leader blinked. That he hadn't expected. The lobby is empty, Nathan said. He kept his hands at his sides open. Your people are down. The files are locked. The signal relay is dark. And there are federal agents outside who have had a long time to set up a perimeter. He took one step into the room. You're not walking out of here with anything you came for. You know that. I'm walking out of here with my life, the leader said. That's still something. Yeah. Another step. It is. I'm not trying to take that from you. The leader's eyes narrowed. Then what are you doing? Giving you a reason to make the right decision. Another step, 12 feet now. You blow this building, you're in it. The south stairwell you want out of isn't south of here, it's east, and you know that because you walk this building, which means you know where every device is, which means you know the east stairwell device goes off, and you don't make it to the street. Silence. You planned this very carefully, Nathan said. Men who plan this carefully plan their exit even more carefully. You have a route, you have a vehicle, you have somewhere to go. 10 feet. None of that works if the building comes down. The leader looked at him. His thumb was on the phone screen, but not pressing. Not yet. Who are you? He said. Nobody, Nathan said. I'm just a guy who had a paycheck to deposit. Something moved across the leader's face. Not quite humor. Not quite anything. He looked at the phone in his hand, and Nathan watched him calculate. The way Nathan had been calculating all night, running the scenarios, the odds, the outcomes. Then the leader's thumb moved, not to the trigger, to the side, and he set the phone on the terminal beside him. South stairwell, he said. You said east. I did, Nathan said. You were lying. I was, Nathan said. I'm actually pretty good at it. The leader looked at him for a long moment. Then he set the rifle on the floor beside the phone, and he put his hands up, and Nathan crossed the remaining distance, and it was over. The phone was in Nathan's hand. The rifle was on the floor. The leader was against the wall with his wrists secured, and outside, through the narrow level 3 window, Nathan could see the lights. Red and blue, the whole block converted into emergency infrastructure, federal and local, and every agency that got involved when a Manhattan bank turned into a siege. He looked at the phone for a moment. Just held it. His hands were shaking. He noticed that now, for the first time all evening, the fine tremor that lived in the aftermath of adrenaline, the body's way of billing you for what it had done. He made a fist and it stopped, mostly. He picked up the sidearm from where he'd set it on the floor and put it in his waistband, and he walked to the stairwell, and he went down. Olivia was still behind the reception desk when he came through the lobby. She stood up when she saw him. Her eyes went to his hands, specifically to the phone, and something in her shoulders dropped about 2 inches. It's done? She said. It's done. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second, then pulled it away. The devices are still in the walls. Bomb squad can handle that. The receiver's dead, and the trigger's in my hand. He held the phone up and then pocketed it. Nobody presses anything. She nodded. Then she looked at the lobby, at the empty space where 61 people had been lying on the floor an hour ago, now just marble and brass, and the stillness of a place that had been through something terrible and was sitting in the aftermath of it. Gerald got everyone out, she said. Yeah. Your daughter? Outside. With him. She nodded again. She was going to cry, Nathan realized. Not now, not in this lobby. She was holding it together with the last of whatever reserve she'd been running on since 4:47 in the afternoon. But soon, somewhere private, she was going to let the evening's weight hit the floor, and it was going to make a significant impact. We should go outside, he said. Yeah. She didn't move immediately. She stood in the empty lobby for another moment, looking at it. Then she said, very quietly, Thank you. He didn't know what to say to that. He never had with those words. Come on, he said instead. They walked toward the main entrance together, through the dark space that smelled like fear and marble, and the particular silence of something enormous that had almost happened and hadn't. And Nathan pushed the door open, and the evening air came in, exhaust and late summer, and the sound of a city that had no idea what had just occurred 100 feet from its sidewalk. And they walked out into it. The first thing Nathan saw when he came through the front doors was Emma. She was standing behind the police line with Gerald, wrapped in one of those silver emergency blankets that made people look like leftover food. And she was watching the entrance with the specific focused patience of someone who had decided worrying was a waste of energy and had converted it into vigilance instead. When she saw him come through the doors with Olivia behind him, something in her face changed. Not relief exactly, more like the release of a breath she'd been holding since the moment he'd told her to go outside with Gerald, and she'd made the calculation to trust him. She didn't run to him. She waited until Gerald nodded, and then she walked across the cordoned space with the deliberate dignity of a 7-year-old who had decided that running was for people who hadn't kept it together all evening. And when she reached him, she put both arms around his waist and pressed her face against his ribs and held on. He put his hand on the back of her head and held on right back. 4 minutes and 50 seconds, she said, muffled against his jacket. I know, I'm sorry. You said 4 minutes. I was a little busy. She pulled back and looked up at his face, at the cheekbone, now darkening toward a genuinely impressive bruise, and the jaw on the other side that had its own story developing. She reached up and touched the cheekbone very carefully with 2 fingers, the way she'd seen doctors do it on the television shows she wasn't supposed to watch but did anyway, at her grandmother's house. That looks bad, she said. You said that already. It was bad already. It's worse now. Behind them, the lobby entrance was filling with people in tactical gear, FBI insignia on their vests, bomb disposal units moving through in pairs with equipment cases. The radio traffic had shifted from the controlled urgency of a live siege to the different kind of urgency that came with the aftermath, accounting for people, accounting for devices, accounting for everything that needed to be documented before anyone could begin to understand what had happened inside those walls. A woman in a dark suit was moving toward Nathan with the walk of someone who had been waiting to have this conversation for a while and was done waiting. Late 40s, sharp eyes, the kind of face that gave away very little except intelligence. She had a federal badge on her belt and a small notepad in her hand that looked almost quaint given everything else happening around her. Mr. Cross, she said. She didn't phrase it as a question, which meant she already knew who he was. Special Agent Diane Marsh, FBI. I need about 20 minutes of your time. He needs a medic first, Emma said from beside him. Marsh looked down at Emma. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. We have one standing by. She looked back at Nathan. And then 20 minutes. He needs more than a medic, Gerald said. He'd appeared at Nathan's left, still with his sleeves rolled up, his white button-down now considerably less white. He needs someone to explain to him that what he just did in there was either heroic or criminally reckless, depending on who you ask. Gerald, Nathan said, I'm just providing context for the federal agent. Marsh was writing something in the notepad. Your name, sir? Gerald Watkins. I was in the 3rd column cluster, left side. I can walk you through the civilian movements, if that's useful. That's very useful, Mr. Watkins. Someone will come find you in the next 10 minutes. She looked back at Nathan. Medic first. Then we talk. The medic was a young man who worked with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been on scene for 2 hours doing nothing and was grateful for something concrete to do. He cleaned up the cheekbone, decided nothing was fractured by pressing on it in ways that made Nathan's eyes water, then did the same evaluation on the jaw and arrived at the same conclusion. He gave Nathan an ice pack that was immediately too cold and a piece of gauze that wasn't needed and told him to see a doctor in the morning, which Nathan filed alongside the 100 other things he was supposed to do in the morning that he probably wouldn't. Emma sat beside him on the ambulance step during all of this and narrated the medic's actions in a low, running commentary that she seemed to find calming and Nathan found genuinely grounding, even though he couldn't have said why. Across the perimeter, Olivia Sterling was in a separate ambulance bay, getting the cut on her cheek properly addressed. Nathan could see her from where he was sitting, could see the medic working, could see the FBI agent beside her taking notes, could see Olivia talking with the same controlled precision she'd brought to the server room keyboard, to the corridor negotiation upstairs, to the moment she'd held up that access chip in the stairwell window and trusted a construction worker she'd known for 45 minutes to understand what she was telling him. She caught him looking, held it for a moment, looked away. He looked away too. Agent Marsh came back when the medic was done and led him to a folding table that someone had set up on the sidewalk behind one of the command vehicles, the improvised field office of a situation that was too big for anyone's car. She had 2 cups of coffee that she'd gotten from somewhere, and she put one in front of him without asking if he wanted it, which he appreciated because he did. Walk me through it from the beginning, she said. He did. He was economical about it. Not because he was hiding anything, but because the relevant sequence of events didn't require embellishment, and he'd never had the habit of providing it. He started with the lobby line, the entry, the first 20 minutes of assessment, He described the positions, the weapons, the radio communications he'd intercepted, the conversation with Olivia that had given him the building's technical layout, the decision to move when the gunman grabbed Emma. Marsh wrote steadily. She asked good questions, specific, technical, not the kind designed to trip him up, but the kind designed to fill in gaps in a picture she was already assembling from multiple sources. She asked about the device's positions, which he confirmed against what Olivia had shown him on the schematic. She asked about the gang leader's communications, who he'd spoken to on the radio, the content, the timing. He mentioned someone called the client, Nathan said. Twice. Once upstairs when I was listening through the corridor door. Once on the radio before I went up. He was reporting that the primary objective hadn't been secured. Marsh looked up from her notepad. The primary objective being the encrypted files. That's what it sounded like. He used the word client specifically. Yeah, which means someone hired this. Yes, Marsh said. It does. She wrote something, underlined it. Mr. Cross, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer. Okay? Your service record. 9 years. SEAL Team 6. 3 combat deployments. 2 classified operations. I don't have full clearance on. You separated 3 years ago under honorable conditions, no disciplinary record, nothing that would explain, she gestured in the direction of the bank, why a construction worker was available to do what you did tonight. Nathan looked at the coffee cup. I had good training. You neutralized 6 armed and tactically trained individuals in under 40 minutes with no casualties. 5. The 6th was Olivia. 5, then. Marsh set her pen down. I'm not asking because I'm skeptical of you. I'm asking because there are going to be other people in rooms I don't have access to who will ask the same question with different intentions, and I want to understand what I'm dealing with before that happens. He looked at her. She was being straight with him, which he respected. 3 years ago, my wife died, he said. Breast cancer. Emma was 4. I got out, moved back to New York, got my contractor's license, and I've been doing renovation work since. He paused. I picked Emma up from school this afternoon, and she wanted a hot dog from the cart on 54th. We stopped at the bank first, that's all. Marsh looked at him for a long moment. That's all, she said. Yeah. She picked her pen back up. For what it's worth, the people in that lobby are alive because of what you did tonight. All 61 of them. She said it plainly, not as a compliment but as a fact, which was the only way he could have heard it without flinching away from it. Including Ms. Sterling, whose testimony is going to be central to what comes next. What does come next? She looked across the perimeter at the bank building where the bomb disposal units were still working their way through the device extraction. The encrypted files that the gang was sent to destroy. We've had parallel warrants working for 8 months trying to access them through legal channels. Those files contain transaction records connecting a significant amount of money to a man named Caldwell Briggs. Nathan didn't recognize the name. Who is he? On paper, he's the founder and principal investor of a competing financial technology firm called Argent Capital. In practice, based on what we've been building, he's been systematically undermining Sterling's company for 2 years. Insider trading, market manipulation, and when those didn't finish the job, she nodded toward the bank. This. He hired someone to kill her. He hired someone to destroy the evidence first and then eliminate the witness, in that order. Marsh's voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. Olivia Sterling has been fighting this man through every legitimate channel for the better part of a year and getting nowhere because the files were sealed pending a legal dispute he initiated. Tonight was supposed to be his final move. Nathan thought about Olivia at the keyboard in the backup server room, hands shaking, blood running down her cheek, still typing. She knew, he said. She knew that the moment she gave them the files, there was no reason to keep anyone alive. She held on to them as protection. She held on to them as protection, Marsh confirmed. Smart woman. Also an extremely dangerous position to be in. How close was the legal case before tonight? Close. Within weeks of a ruling that would have forced the files open through proper channels. Briggs apparently decided he couldn't wait. She closed her notepad. Mr. Cross, I think we're done for tonight. Someone will contact you in the next 48 hours about a formal statement. You should expect that process to take several weeks. Understood. She stood up. One more thing. She looked at him with the directness that had been present in every exchange they'd had. What you did in there, I understand why you did it, and I'm not in the business of second-guessing results. But you should know that it very easily could have gone another way. I know, he said. Do you? He thought about Emma's arm in the gunman's grip, about the specific half-second in which his planning had ended and something else had taken over, something that didn't calculate odds or evaluate risk, but simply moved. Yeah, he said. I know exactly how it could have gone. She held his gaze for a moment. Go take care of your daughter, she said. Then she walked away into the organized chaos of the perimeter, and Nathan sat with his cold ice pack and his lukewarm coffee and the particular feeling of a body coming down from something enormous. Emma appeared at his elbow. She'd lost the silver blanket somewhere, and she had a juice box that one of the officers must have given her, and she sat down beside him on the ambulance step with the comfortable familiarity of someone settling in for a long conversation. He put his arm around her. That lady looked serious, Emma said. She's FBI. Is she mad at you? No. Are you in trouble? No. She processed this, drank her juice, looked at the bank building with its yellow perimeter tape and its floodlights and its procession of officials moving in and out. Dad? Yeah. When you came back downstairs, she paused. You weren't scared. It wasn't a question, quite. I was scared, he said. She looked up at him with the expression that meant she was deciding whether to accept that or push back on it. You didn't look it. I know. He looked at the building. Being scared and looking scared are different things. When you're scared and you show it at the wrong time, other people get more scared. So sometimes you just don't show it. He paused. But I was scared. I'm telling you the truth. She was quiet for a moment. What were you scared of? He looked at her. You, he said simply. She understood what he meant. He could see it in her face, the understanding that fear, for him, had a specific shape, and that shape was her. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his arm. They sat like that for a while, watching the organized aftermath of the evening unfold around them. The call about Caldwell Briggs broke publicly 6 days later. Nathan found out the way he found out most things he wasn't directly involved in, through Gerald, who sent him a news link at 7:30 in the morning with a text that said only, "Told you something was off about this whole situation," as though Gerald had been suspicious all along, which was revisionist but forgivable given the circumstances. The story was significant enough to run above the fold everywhere that still had a fold, and across the top of every screen that didn't. Caldwell Briggs, founder of Argent Capital, arrested on federal charges including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, market manipulation, and racketeering. The indictment was 37 pages. The encrypted files that Olivia Sterling had refused to give up in the lobby of Meridian Trust, now legally unseized under emergency warrant given the attempted destruction of evidence, were cited across 11 of those pages as central to the prosecution's case. Nathan read the article twice, standing in his kitchen in the early morning quiet before Emma woke up, with the coffee maker doing its work behind him and the city beginning its noise outside the window. Briggs had a face that belonged to the kind of man who got his photo taken at charity functions. Late 50s, silver-haired, the practiced look of someone who had spent decades being photographed while doing things that didn't deserve photographs. Nathan looked at that face for a long moment, thinking about the bank lobby, about the gang leader's voice on the radio saying the client, about the specific and deliberate cruelty of sending armed men to destroy a woman because she had evidence you'd rather didn't exist. He put his phone face down on the counter and poured his coffee. His cheek had moved through purple and yellow and had arrived somewhere in the territory of a faded green that Emma described as actually kind of cool, with the aesthetic detachment of someone who didn't have to live in the face. His jaw had been less dramatic, sore for 2 days, then fine. He'd seen a doctor on day 3, not day 1, and the doctor had told him there was no structural damage and also that he should probably lead with fewer chins in the future, which Nathan had not found particularly helpful. The formal FBI statement had taken 4 hours across 2 days, conducted in a field office on Varick Street by Marsh, and 2 colleagues whose names he'd already forgotten. He'd been precise and complete, and they'd been professional and thorough, and at the end of it, Marsh had shaken his hand and told him the Bureau appreciated his cooperation, which was the federal government's way of saying thanks, without committing to anything specific. The construction site on 61st had been understanding about his absence. Mike Draper, his site supervisor, had texted on the second day, "Saw you on the news, take whatever time you need." Also, that was insane. Nathan had taken 2 days and gone back on the third, and the familiarity of it, the noise, the physical work, the uncomplicated requirement to show up and do a specific concrete thing until it was done, had been more restorative than any of the alternatives. Emma had gone back to school on Monday. Her teacher had called Nathan that afternoon to let him know that Emma had given a very detailed account of the bank siege during show and tell, which Nathan had not been prepared for. The teacher had handled it well, had treated it as the extraordinary event it was without alarming the other children, but had gently suggested that Nathan might want to check in with Emma about what she needed to process the experience. He'd had that conversation that evening at dinner, or tried to. Emma had informed him that she had already processed it, that processing it had taken approximately 1 night and most of a Saturday, and that the main thing she had decided was that her father's job was actually more interesting than construction, and could he please explain what a SEAL team was? He'd explained briefly and carefully, and Emma had listened with the complete attention she gave things that mattered to her, and at the end she'd been quiet for a moment and then said, "So you used to save people?" "Sometimes," he said, "and then you stopped. And then I had you." She'd thought about this. "You can do both," she said. "Ms. Reyes coaches soccer and also teaches 4th grade." He'd been trying to think of a response to that when his phone rang, and the number on the screen was one he didn't recognize, a Manhattan area code, which could have been anyone. He'd answered it anyway. "Mr. Cross," the voice was Olivia Sterling's. He recognized it immediately. That specific combination of precision and weight that he'd listened to in the backup server room while she described the building's infrastructure with blood running down her cheek. "I hope this is a reasonable time to call." "It's fine," he said. He pushed back from the dinner table and moved into the hallway. Emma watched him go with the expression that meant she was clocking everything. "How are you?" "Functional," she said, which he recognized as a specific kind of answer, one that was honest without being vulnerable. "The cut needed 4 stitches. My PR team needed more. I saw the news this morning." Everyone did. A pause. "I wanted to call before the lawyers made calling complicated, to thank you for what you did." "You did your part," he said. "I typed on a keyboard. You—" She stopped. He could hear her choosing words carefully. "You kept 61 people alive and then came upstairs to do the hard part. I don't know how to equivalence those 2 things, so I'm not going to try. I'm just saying thank you." He leaned against the hallway wall. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Emma's profile as she ate her dinner, still watching the hallway. "You're welcome," he said. "How's the case looking?" "Solid. The files are devastating for Briggs and his people. Agent Marsh tells me it could run for 2 years in court, but—" She sounded like someone who had made peace with a long fight. "I've been at it for 2 years already. I know how to pace myself." "You do," he said, thinking of her in the lobby, buying time with nothing but nerve and a refusal to give them what they wanted. Another pause. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know in advance that if the answer is no, that's a complete sentence, and I'll respect it." He waited. "I need a director of executive security," she said. "The position has existed on paper for a year, but after what happened with Briggs, I need it to be real. I need someone who knows how to read a room, who doesn't panic, who understands threats before they become incidents. Someone who can look at a situation the way you looked at that lobby and make decisions that protect people." She let that sit for a moment. "I've spoken to 3 security firms in the past week. They send me men who know the right language and can cite the right certifications. None of them would have done what you did." "What I did wasn't protocol," he said. "No, but it worked." Another pause. "I'm not looking for protocol. I'm looking for judgment." He was quiet for a long moment. In the kitchen, Emma had given up the pretense of eating and was openly watching the hallway. He looked at her. The green gold eyes, the patient expression of someone who was already reading the situation and forming opinions about it. I'd want to talk about terms, he said. Of course, and there are conditions. I'd expect that. Evenings are mine, he said. Whatever the situation, whatever the schedule, after 6, I'm Emma's father. That doesn't get negotiated and it doesn't get overridden. If there's a conflict between a work situation and picking my daughter up from school, Emma wins. Every time. Silence on the line. Not the silence of hesitation. The silence of someone who had expected this and was deciding how to say that it was fine. Agreed, Olivia said, without reservation. And I want to be honest with you. I've been out for 3 years. Whatever I was before, I don't know exactly who that is anymore. I'm not promising you the person who walked into that bank. The person who walked out of it is who I'm calling, she said. He looked at the ceiling, the old water stain in the corner of the hallway, which he'd been meaning to address for 8 months, the fraying cuff on the jacket hanging by the door, the accumulated modest evidence of a life that was genuinely his, built carefully out of what he'd had left 3 years ago, which hadn't been much. I'll come in Thursday, he said. We can talk about it properly. Thursday works. A pause. How's your daughter? She gave show and tell about the bank siege on Monday. A short, genuine laugh. He hadn't heard that from her before, and it was different from the controlled voice she'd been using, more human, less managed. That's the most Emma Cross thing I've ever heard. You don't know her. I know she sat behind a marble column for an hour in a bank siege and didn't make a sound. That tells me quite a bit. Another pause. Thursday, then. Thursday, he said, and ended the call. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen and sat down across from Emma, who had rearranged her food on the plate in a pattern that suggested she'd been thinking rather than eating for the past several minutes. Who was that? She said. A woman I met at the bank. The one you were talking to, with the blazer. Yeah. Emma's fork moved through the rearranged food. What did she want? Nathan looked at his daughter. Thought about what to say and how to say it. She offered me a job. Emma looked up. A different job? Not construction? A different job. She considered this with the thoroughness she applied to everything. What kind? Keeping people safe, he said. She sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the muffled street noise from outside. Then Emma looked at him with the expression that sometimes appeared on her face and reminded him, painfully and beautifully, of someone else. That particular combination of assessment and warmth that wasn't quite a smile but held one inside it. You're good at that, she said. I don't know, he said honestly. I used to be. You still are. She said it simply, with the confidence of someone who had spent the past 6 days thinking about a marble floor and her father's voice saying, I've got you, and had arrived at a conclusion about it. You said yes? I said Thursday, he said. We'll see. Emma nodded as though this were a reasonable answer that she had decided to accept. She picked up her fork and began actually eating, and Nathan Cross sat across from her in his kitchen in a city that was already forgetting what had happened 5 blocks uptown, and he felt something shift, quietly, without drama, the way tides shifted rather than the way waves did, in the arrangement of the life he'd been building, not breaking it, just adjusting it, making room. He reached across the table and stole one of Emma's French fries, which she batted at his hand without looking up, and outside the window the city did what cities did, which was move forward without waiting, and the evening light came in orange and low and lit up the ordinary table and the ordinary kitchen and the ordinary extraordinary fact of the two of them still sitting in it. He thought about Thursday. He thought about what Marsh had said, that it very easily could have gone another way. It could have. He knew that in the specific way that people who had stood in those kinds of rooms knew things, not abstractly, but in the body, in the hands that had still been shaking on the level 3 stairwell when nobody was looking. It could have gone a dozen different ways, and most of them were worse than what had happened. But it hadn't. And Emma was here, stealing her fry back with righteous indignation, and the evening was quiet, and somewhere across the city Olivia Sterling was in whatever her home was, with 4 stitches in her cheek and a case that was finally moving in the right direction, and 61 people were having dinners with their families, and probably not yet fully understanding why that fact felt more significant than it usually did. Nathan Cross looked at his daughter, and he let the evening do what evenings did, which was settle, and he stayed at the table a long time after the dishes were done. Thursday came with rain. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that shut streets down or gave the news something to talk about. Just the steady, gray mid-October rain that Manhattan wore like an old coat. The kind that made the sidewalks smell like wet stone and copper, and made the taxis disappear exactly when you needed one. Nathan stood outside the Sterling Financial Tower on Park Avenue, with his collar up and his hands in his pockets, looking at the building for a moment before going in. 31 stories. Glass and steel, the kind of architecture that was trying to say something serious about the people inside it. A revolving door at the base, a security desk visible through the glass, 2 cameras on the entrance canopy that were positioned for maximum coverage with minimum blind spots. He'd noticed the camera angles before he'd noticed the revolving door, which told him something about where his head was these days. He went in. The lobby was nothing like Meridian Trust. Smaller, more functional. Less marble monument, more working building. The security guard at the desk was a heavy-set man in his 50s who checked Nathan's ID with the particular boredom of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, then called up to the executive floor and told Nathan to take elevator 3 to the 31st floor where someone would meet him. The someone was a young woman named Priya who had the organized energy of a person managing 17 things simultaneously and making it look like 12. She walked fast and talked faster, leading him through a floor that was quiet for a Thursday morning. Fewer people than he'd expected, more empty desks than a company this size should have had. He mentioned it. Priya glanced at him sideways. We lost about 30% of our staff in the past year. When the Briggs situation started affecting our public profile, the legal disputes, the regulatory scrutiny, people got nervous. A pause. Some of them went to Argent Capital, actually, which in retrospect looks pretty bad for them. How's morale now? Better than 2 weeks ago, she said, which was honest rather than optimistic, and he respected the distinction. Olivia's office was at the corner of the floor, which was standard, but the corner it occupied looked out over the intersection of Park and 52nd rather than the more prestigious northern view, which was not standard and suggested either that the office assignment had been inherited rather than chosen, or that the person in it had different priorities than most people in Corner's offices did. The door was open. Olivia was standing at the window with a coffee cup and her phone, talking to someone in a tone that was controlled and precise and clearly wrapping up. She saw Nathan in the doorway and held up one finger. A minute. And he nodded and came in and looked at the office while she finished. It was a working office, not a display office. Papers on the desk in stacks that had an internal logic, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. 2 whiteboards on the side wall covered in what looked like financial diagrams, one erased and rewritten over so many times that the ghost marks of previous iterations were still visible in the white. A framed photograph on the desk that he didn't look at directly, but registered in peripheral. A woman he didn't recognize, older, the family resemblance clear. No trophies, no awards on the wall, no visible evidence that the person who worked here was interested in being looked at. She ended the call and turned from the window. The cut on her cheek had closed cleanly. 4 stitches, healing well, a thin pink line that would probably fade to almost nothing in a few months. She looked rested in the specific way that people looked rested when they weren't, actually, but had gotten enough consecutive hours to perform it convincingly. "You found it okay?" she said. "GPS," he said. "Right." She put the phone down and gestured to the chairs in front of the desk. They both sat, and for a moment there was the particular awkwardness of 2 people who'd been through something extreme together, trying to locate the register of a normal professional meeting. "How's the face?" "Fading." "Emma?" "Back to full opinions," he said. "She's fine." Something eased in Olivia's expression. "Good." She looked at him directly, the same way she'd looked at him across the lobby, when she'd been deciding how much to trust a construction worker with an unusual quality of calm. I want to be straight with you about what this job actually is before we talk about any of the formal terms. Please. It's not primarily physical, she said. I have people for physical. There's an existing security team, 4 staff, and I'll be expanding it. What I need from a director is judgment, risk assessment, the ability to walk into a situation, a meeting, a travel itinerary, a business relationship, and tell me what I'm not seeing. She paused. The Briggs situation went on for 2 years, partly because I didn't have anyone around me who was looking at it the right way. My lawyers were looking at it legally. My board was looking at it financially. Nobody was looking at it as a threat to people. She set her coffee cup down. I don't want that to happen again. Nathan looked at the whiteboards, the layered erasures and rewrites, the evidence of a mind that worked problems over and over from different angles until it found the one that held. You'd been building the legal case for 2 years, he said. You knew it was serious. Why didn't you have security in place already? She was quiet for a moment. Because I convinced myself the legal system would resolve it before it became something else. And because... She stopped. Started again. Because admitting that you need physical protection means admitting that someone hates you enough to cause you physical harm. And that's a different kind of thing to sit with. It changes how you walk through the world. A pause. I didn't want to change how I walked through the world. And now? She looked at him steadily. Now I've been in a bank vault lobby while someone pointed a rifle at 60 strangers to get to me. The world changed itself. I'm adjusting. That was honest in a way that most people in her position wouldn't have been, and Nathan noted it, not as a weakness, as the opposite, the specific toughness of someone who could look at a bad decision they'd made and name it without dressing it up as something else. The terms I mentioned on the phone, he said. Evenings, she said. Emma, non-negotiable. I understood that, and I meant it when I agreed. And I meant what I said about not promising you who I was 3 years ago. She tilted her head slightly. What are you now? He thought about it honestly, the way she'd been honest with him. Someone who's been paying attention to things that don't matter as much as I thought they did, and not paying enough attention to things that do. He paused. I think the skills are still there. I know the instincts are. What I don't have is the certainty I used to have, about my own judgment, about what I'm willing to do and when. That sounds like wisdom to me, she said. It sounds like hesitation to me. There's a difference. Sometimes. He looked at the window, at the rain tracking down the glass. The night at the bank. I stopped planning at a certain point. Something took over that wasn't planning. I've been thinking about that. Was it a problem? The outcome suggests it wasn't. The outcome was good. The process was... He searched for the right word. Uncontrolled. I don't love uncontrolled. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than reassuring. She wasn't trying to talk him out of what he'd said. She was engaging with it. You spent an hour planning before that point, building every scenario, mapping every contingency. When the moment came that required you to stop planning and act, you acted correctly. That's not uncontrolled. That's the plan running below the surface even when you can't see it anymore. She paused. I think you know that. I think you've always known it. He looked at her. I watched you in that lobby, she said simply. I watched you from the moment they brought me back downstairs. You were the stillest person in the room. Every time one of those men moved, you moved your eyes. Every time there was a sound, you processed it and filed it and moved on. You weren't scared. She held up a hand. I know you said you were, but fear has a specific effect on attention. It narrows it. Yours wasn't narrow. He didn't answer that directly. What are the formal terms? She named a figure. He blinked once, which was the closest he came to an external reaction, and she noticed and didn't comment on it, which was the right call. Benefits, she continued. Office on this floor. It's, not this one, obviously. Access to the full security team and the authority to restructure it if you determine that's necessary. Travel, when required. And I'll want to discuss protocols for that separately because I travel more than I'd like, and it's historically been undersecured. She folded her hands on the desk. What I'm asking for in return is honest assessment. If you think something I'm doing creates risk, I need you to tell me. Not manage around me. Tell me. I've had enough people manage around me to last a lifetime. That I can do, he said. Even if I push back? Especially then. Something in her face shifted. Not a smile exactly, more the specific expression of someone checking a box that they'd been worried about. When can you start? He thought about the Carlisle renovation, about Mike Draper, who would need 2 weeks' notice minimum and would probably extend that to 3 out of principled stubbornness. About Emma's school schedule, which had nothing to do with when he started a new job, but which he'd been using as an orientation point for his life for 3 years, and old habits died in their own time. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she agreed. They shook hands across the desk. Her grip was firm and direct, and she didn't do the thing some people did where they tried to make a handshake communicative beyond what a handshake was. It was a handshake. They were starting something. He took the elevator back down in the rain-gray light and stood on Park Avenue with his collar up and thought about what he'd just agreed to and found that he wasn't as ambivalent as he'd expected to be. The weeks that followed were not easy weeks, and he'd been honest enough with himself to have expected that. Leaving the construction site was simpler than he thought it would be, and harder in ways he hadn't anticipated. Mike Draper took the news with the stoic acceptance of a man who had watched a lot of good workers leave for better money and had made peace with the arithmetic of it. Then spent the next 3 days finding reasons to extend conversations with Nathan at the end of shifts in a way that was very clearly not about the work, and was clearly about something else that Mike Draper would never have named out loud. On Nathan's last day, Mike had handed him a $20 bill folded around a card that said, "Good luck. You earned it in handwriting that looked like someone had learned penmanship in another century." Nathan had put it in his wallet and left it there. The transition into Sterling Financial was the kind of uncomfortable that came with any new environment, learning the rhythms, the vocabulary, the unspoken rules of how the people in the building related to each other and to Olivia specifically. The security team he inherited was competent and underutilized, 4 people who'd been doing access control and escort duty and hadn't been asked to think beyond that. He spent the first week just listening to them, which seemed to surprise them. The second week, he asked each of them separately what they thought the actual risk profile of the company was. 3 of them gave him the answer they thought he wanted. One of them, a woman named Torres, who had been with the company longest and had the specific look of someone who'd been waiting to be asked that question for a long time, gave him a real answer that ran for 40 minutes and was more useful than anything the formal briefing documents had contained. He promoted Torres to deputy 2 weeks in. She took the news with the same contained expression she'd given everything, and then went home and apparently celebrated in whatever way Torres celebrated things, because she came back the next morning looking like herself again and immediately started reorganizing the team's communication protocols in ways Nathan had been about to suggest. The Briggs trial, meanwhile, was moving through its preliminary stages with the grinding pace of federal prosecution. Slow, methodical, relentless in the way that good legal machinery was relentless when it finally got properly aimed at something. Olivia testified twice in preliminary hearings, and both times Nathan coordinated her transit, her building access, the composition of the team around her. Both times were uneventful in the way that good security made things uneventful. Not because nothing was a threat, but because the threats had been thought about before they materialized. He and Olivia developed a working rhythm that had taken about 3 weeks to find and had been slightly awkward until they did. She was direct with him in the way she'd said she would be, which he appreciated and occasionally pushed back on when the directness was running ahead of the information she had to back it up. She took the pushback better than he'd expected. Not easily, exactly, but without the defensive reaction that some people had when someone they'd hired told them they were wrong. She argued back when she had grounds and conceded when she didn't, which was more than he could say for most people he'd worked with in any context. She worked too much. That was the first thing he'd identified as a risk, and the thing she was least interested in hearing about. She was in the office before most of her staff arrived and was regularly still there when building security did their last sweep. He'd mentioned it once, carefully, framing it as a security concern. Fatigue affected judgment, affected awareness, made people predictable in their patterns. And she'd looked at him with an expression that was approximately 50% acknowledgement and 50% I hear you, and I'm ignoring you, which was honest at least. He mentioned it a second time, less carefully. You're not wrong, she said, which was not the same as I'll change, and they both knew it. I know I'm not wrong, he said. That's why I brought it up twice. Was that the second time? I may have miscounted. Olivia. She looked up from whatever she'd been reading. Something in her expression shifted into the register she used when she was actually listening rather than managing. It's harder to go home to an empty apartment than it is to stay here, she said. Flat, factual, no performance around it. That's the honest answer. He understood that. He understood it from the inside, from the 3 years before Emma had been old enough to fill a room with her presence. The specific weight of a space that used to have someone in it and now didn't. Yeah, he said. I know it's not a good reason. It's a human reason. She looked at him for a moment. You're not what I expected, she said, when I offered you this job. What did you expect? Someone more, she searched for it, tactical. Someone who thought in procedures. I do think in procedures. You think in people, she said. The procedures are secondary. A pause. That night in the bank, you spent an hour building a plan, and the plan had almost nothing to do with tactics. It was entirely about the people in the room, who could move, who couldn't, who was holding on, and who was running out of time. Torres said the same thing after her first week with you, that you were doing something different from what she'd seen before, and she couldn't figure out what it was, and I told her it was that. He didn't know what to do with that, so he set it aside. Go home at a reasonable time, he said. I'm asking as the person responsible for your safety. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the document she'd been reading. Fine, she said. But if anything in this building burns down because I left early, I'll take full responsibility. You'd better. She picked up her coat. How's Emma? The shift in topic was so abrupt it almost had a sound. She's good. She's in the school play. She's playing a tree. A tree? A significant tree, apparently. She has 3 lines. Olivia smiled. A real one, not the managed version she deployed in meetings. It changed her face considerably. That's very Emma. He raised an eyebrow. You don't know her. I've heard about her for 6 weeks, Olivia said, shrugging into her coat. I feel like I know the broad outlines. She said goodnight and left, and Nathan stood in the quiet office for a moment after she was gone, looking at the rain-streaked window and the city lights beginning to come on in the early dark, and found himself thinking about what she'd said. You think in people, and whether that was true, and whether it was something he'd always done, or something that 3 years of being someone's only parent had built in him one ordinary day at a time. He thought it was probably the second one. He thought Emma had done that, without knowing she was doing it, by being exactly who she was, demanding and precise and unafraid and profoundly herself, and by requiring him to pay attention to another person's interior life the way he'd always paid attention to the exterior world. He went home. Emma was at the kitchen table with her homework spread across it in the organized chaos that she maintained was a system, and Nathan maintained was a catastrophe, and she looked up when he came in and assessed the time on the microwave clock and made no comment about it, which meant he was within acceptable parameters. Tree rehearsal today? He said, hanging up his coat. Mrs. Kowalski said I have the best tree posture in the class, Emma said, with the specific dignity of someone reporting a fact that was also a triumph. She said most kids don't understand trees. I understand trees. He tried to find the right response to this. That's great, Em. It's because I stand still really well, she said. Mrs. Kowalski says stillness is underrated. Nathan looked at his daughter, at the green gold eyes, the ink smudge on her left hand, the way she held herself in the chair with the natural uprightness of someone who didn't think about posture because she'd never needed to. The specific, uncopyable fact of her. Mrs. Kowalski's right, he said. The trial of Caldwell Briggs concluded 7 months after it began, which was fast by federal standards and felt slow to everyone who'd been waiting. The verdict came on a Wednesday morning. Nathan found out through Olivia, who texted him 2 words, guilty, all counts. He was in a parking structure on Madison Avenue running a route assessment for an upcoming board meeting when the message came through, and he stood between two parked cars in the fluorescent half-light of the second level and read those two words 3 times. All counts: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, market manipulation, obstruction. The 37 pages of indictment rendered into a verdict that a jury of 12 people had agreed on after 4 days of deliberation. He texted back, "Good." Then he put the phone in his pocket and finished the route assessment, because the board meeting was still happening and the route still needed assessing, and that was what the work was. Olivia called that evening. He was making dinner, something involving pasta and the contents of the refrigerator that Emma had diagnosed as experimental but probably fine. And he put the phone on speaker while he cooked. 7 months, she said. How do you feel? A long pause. I've been trying to figure that out all day. Her voice had the specific quality of someone speaking from inside something large that they hadn't fully mapped yet. I thought I'd feel more. Or differently. I've been working toward this for 2 years and now it's done. And I feel... She paused again. Tired. Mostly just tired. That's the right feeling, he said. Is it? You've been running on the fight for 2 years. The fight's over. Your body knows before your head does. He turned the heat down under the pasta. The other feelings come later. The tired comes first. She was quiet for a moment. That sounds like experience talking. It is. From deployments? From a lot of things. He thought about the 3 years after Claire died. The specific exhaustion that had lived underneath everything, that had nothing to do with sleep, the way the tiredness had to run its course before anything else could begin. Give it time. Let yourself be tired. It's not a problem to solve. She made a small sound that was somewhere between acknowledgement and something more private. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Not just tonight. The past 7 months. You don't have to thank me. It's the job. Some of it's the job, she said. Some of it is something else. He didn't answer that immediately. Emma had appeared in the kitchen doorway, assessing the pasta situation and finding it adequate, and she gave Nathan the look that meant dinner needed to be on the table in a specific window of time that she considered reasonable, and he was approaching the edge of. I should go, he said. Emma's giving me the look. The tree posture look or the dinner look? The dinner look. They're actually the same look, she laughed. The real one, the one that changed her face. Tell her the tree posture is exceptional. She already knows. He ended the call and put the phone on the counter and got plates down from the cabinet, and Emma leaned against the doorframe watching him with the particular patience of someone who had decided that asking if dinner was ready was less efficient than simply being present until it was. Was that Olivia? She said. Yeah. Did she win? Yeah, she won. Emma considered this with the thoroughness she brought to things that mattered. Good, she said. Then, is she okay? Nathan looked at his daughter, 7 years old and already asking the right question. Not what happened or what does it mean, but is she okay? Which was the question underneath all the other questions. He'd like to think she'd come to that naturally, on her own. He suspected he'd had something to do with it, without ever having taught it directly, the way you sometimes pass things on without a lesson plan. She will be, he said. That's different from okay, Emma said. Yeah, he said. It is, but it's better than the alternative. She thought about that. Then she came all the way into the kitchen and got herself a glass of water and sat down at the table, and Nathan put dinner on the plates, and they ate together in the ordinary light of an ordinary Wednesday evening, and the city went on outside the window, the way cities went on, indifferent and continuous and full of people who were winning things and losing things and surviving things and trying to get dinner on the table before it got cold. The school play was on a Friday evening in November. Nathan sat in the third row with a program that had been printed on someone's home printer and had a slightly skewed margin on the left side, and he watched Emma stand center left of the stage in a brown costume that was clearly meant to suggest bark and hold herself with the absolute stillness of someone who had been told her stillness was exceptional and had taken that information seriously. She had 3 lines. She delivered them with the measured gravity of someone who understood that trees were not a comic role and had decided to play it straight. The audience laughed anyway, not at her, but with her. The specific warm laughter of people watching a child commit entirely to something, and Emma did not break character or smile or acknowledge the response, because she was a tree, and trees did not respond to laughter. Nathan had his hand over his mouth through all of it. Afterward, in the lobby, Emma found him immediately in the crowd with the specific navigation skills of someone who had always known exactly where her father was in any room. She was still in the bark costume and carrying the paper leaf headpiece in one hand, and she looked up at him with the expression that wanted to be casual and kept sliding into pleased. "You laughed," she said. "The audience laughed," he said. "I was moved." "You were laughing." "I was moved by the comedy inherent in the human condition." She stared at him. "You're so weird." "You were great," he said, and he meant it completely, not as a parent addendum, but as a genuine fact. "You were the best tree I've ever seen." Something in her face went fully into pleased and stayed there. "Mrs. Kowalski said so too." Mrs. Kowalski is right about a lot of things. They were navigating toward the exit when Nathan looked up and found Olivia standing near the door. He stopped. She looked at him with an expression that was slightly uncertain, which was not an expression he'd seen on her face in 7 months of working together, and she was wearing her coat and holding the same kind of skewed margin program he was holding, and he realized she'd been in the audience. "I hope this is okay," she said. "Emma mentioned it in the office when she came in after school last week. She paused. "I wanted to see." Emma had come to the office exactly once, 2 weeks ago, when a school professional development day had coincided with a calendar hole that Nathan hadn't been able to fill. She'd spent 3 hours doing her homework at a spare desk and having what Nathan gathered were extremely thorough conversations with every member of the security team individually, and Torres had reported afterward that Emma had very specific opinions about access control protocols and had at least 2 of them correct. He looked at Emma, who was looking at Olivia with the steady assessment that she gave adults she was trying to categorize. "You came to my play?" Emma said. "I did," Olivia said. "You were very convincing." "As a tree." "As a tree," Olivia confirmed with the specific seriousness that the role deserved. Emma looked at her for another moment, running whatever calculation she was running. Then she looked at Nathan, then back at Olivia. "Do you want to come get hot dogs?" she said. "There's a cart on 54th that's still open." A beat. Nathan watched Olivia's face, but watched the uncertainty give way to something warmer, something that hadn't been managed or calibrated. "I'd like that," Olivia said. They walked out into the November cold, the 3 of them, onto a sidewalk that was already putting on its holiday lights, even though it was technically too early and nobody was complaining. Emma walked between them eating her hot dog with mustard, extra, as requested, and conducting a detailed comparative analysis of the relative merits of the various cast members' performances, sparing no one, including herself. Nathan ate his hot dog and listened and let the cold air work on his face and thought about the things you couldn't plan for, the things that arrived sideways in the middle of ordinary moments that rearranged the landscape without announcing themselves. He'd spent years being good at anticipating what was coming. He was learning, slowly and imperfectly, that some of the best things didn't come from the direction you were watching. He thought about Meridian Trust, about a lobby that smelled like fear and marble, and 61 people on the floor, and a woman in a charcoal blazer who'd held on to the only leverage she had while everything around her fell apart. He thought about Emma's hand in the gunman's grip and the half-second before he moved. He thought about the gang leader setting the phone on the server room terminal and the specific quality of the silence that followed. He thought about what it meant that all of that had happened and this was where it had led. A sidewalk in November, a 7-year-old with mustard on her chin, the particular sound of a city that didn't know and didn't need to know what any of them had survived to get here. "You have mustard on your chin," Olivia told Emma. Emma wiped her chin with her sleeve, which addressed the immediate problem while creating a secondary one. "Did it get on the bark?" she said, looking at her costume. "A little," Nathan said. "That's okay," Emma said, with the practicality of someone who had decided bark could absorb a certain amount of mustard without losing its dignity. "Trees are resilient." Nathan looked at Olivia over Emma's head. She was already looking at him, and she had the expression of someone who was not yet sure what they were in the middle of, but had decided they were okay with not knowing yet. Which was, he was finding, a harder thing to practice than it sounded, and more important than almost anything else he could think of. "Come on," Emma said, already moving down the sidewalk. "There's a good corner up here, and it's cold." They went. Not because they had a plan, not because they'd sorted out what came next, or mapped every contingency, or decided anything official about the shape of the future, but because Emma was moving, and the night was cold, and there was somewhere warm a few blocks away, and that was enough. That was, Nathan Cross had learned in the hardest possible school, almost always enough. He caught up to his daughter on the corner, and Olivia walked beside him, and the city did what it always did, which was make room for 3 more people moving through it, and the lights were coming on everywhere against the November dark. And they walked into them together,